Hi, welcome to Eye Openers. I'm your host, Brittany Drozd, and each week I bring you insightful conversations with entrepreneurs that will help you make more money, become a strong leader, and build a business culture that you're proud of. Grab your coffee and let's dive in.
Today, we are speaking with the one and only Brittany Drozd. Brittany, by education, holds a master's degree in psychotherapy and management, which I find a fascinating combination. I'm looking forward to talking about that. But early on in her career, she worked both as a psychotherapist and then in a role as a regional manager, actually overseeing a team of clinicians as well as 500 clients, correct?
Yes.
Within a large behavioral health network. But all of that changed in 2013 when Brittany pivoted, became an entrepreneur, and launched her coaching business. She describes herself as part mind shifter, business builder, and a catalyst for change who has an obsession with mastering human motivation and perfecting business management. Those are awesome aspirational goals. I have to say that, Brittany. In addition to all of that, Brittany is a mom of 2 young girls, and she's an avid kite surfer, which means she's got awesome arms. Because I'm always amazed at that when I see kite surfers. So welcome to Beyond Neutral, Brittany.
Thanks for having me, Paula. It is seriously an honor to be here, and I always love talking with you.
So Brittany and I have talked for a while because, in full disclosure, Brittany was my coach. And so some people may be shocked by that coaches have coaches, but every good coach has a coach because we support and appreciate and completely believe in the process, right? It's like doctors having doctors. You don't give yourself a colonoscopy, do you?
Don't recommend it. No.
Don't recommend it. Yeah, same concept. Exactly. Same concept. So Brittany, you've had a really interesting journey, right? From psychotherapist into being an entrepreneur and a coach. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I come from a lineage of entrepreneurs, so it wasn't a foreign concept. I think that's really important to talk about. I've had clients who just never even entertained this idea. But for me, I saw my dad, creating and doing his own thing. And then as I got older, I got more aware of my grandfather was doing the same thing too. And so it was what I thought was like a natural progression for me to learn as much as I could in my 20s, branch out and see, instead of somebody else profiting off of my knowledge and my sweat equity, my hard work, I wanted to take that and harness that for myself and see what I could create.
That's awesome. So I'm interested in the combination of psychotherapy and management.
Yeah.
And I have to say that having, done both, as well as coached both, and that I completely get the connection, but I would love to hear from your perspective how those things tie in now versus how you thought they might tie in.
So I am a total student for life. I think everybody should know that first and foremost. Like if I could find a way to just get paid to just be a student, I might just
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right. Like we both talk about, I think we send each other resources all the time.
Oh yeah. I can't get enough. I can't read enough. Yeah.
So, adopting that growth mindset and then always kind of coming from the angle of being a student or being someone who's there to learn has definitely helped me and supported my growth. I'm not, I was about to say, I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I will do it anyway. It's not like I enjoy it. It's not like I like failing.
Right.
I know it's part of my path and part of my journey. And each time that I have made a misstep or something didn't work out the way I thought it would, it's always led to like the next big success. So I stay in that role. So what that means is I knew from a young age, I wanted to work with people in this really intimate and I would say privileged space of being with people where there's a container of kind of psychological safety and people opening up and being vulnerable. And I just love being in that space with people where they're exploring the depths of their own potential, their own narrative, their own story. So naturally, I thought this is psychology. I'm so curious about what drives people, motivates them, how people respond to incentives and all this. And so that to me is just like human behavior. I'm just so curious, right? Cannot stop learning about it. And naturally, I feel like that evolved into management as well, because that's how we see it in the workplace, but they're really like one and the
Sure.
same. So I always had this like knack for psychology, loved studying it. So it was natural to go get that, the psychotherapy education, but there was like this dual enrollment opportunity to also study management. And so I was learning program development, policy, like all this macroeconomic stuff, to see how it all kind of comes together, because I wanted to work on the psychology of humans, but we're all part of a bigger system. And
Absolutely.
so I thought it was really important to understand the motivations and incentive structures and whatnot, the macroeconomics of this bigger system, because it influences and informs our individual behavior as well.
Absolutely.
So I thought if I could understand those two things and how they work together, and I could understand the different levers that you can pull in either direction, then I could really stand to make a better impact. And then I think I haven't included in my bio is I went back and got a second graduate degree, because I really felt there was a little gap in my training and understanding how it looked in the business world. And that definitely took my business to the next level too, when I was able to support people, but in the framework that they knew and understood.
And that was in organizational behavior, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. That's fascinating. So to clarify, you started out in private practice as a psychotherapist, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. And what kind of created that shift where you said, I don't want to do, because a lot of people, first of all, get confused about the difference between psychotherapy and coaching. And I have a lot of clients who will say to me, I feel like I'm with my therapist, and I'm like, well, you're not. but there is what kind of drove that shift for you to want to move from to coaching, and how do you see those worlds as being different?
I was really lucky to have a friend who's a very successful coach, who knew me from a different context. And he was visiting me at the time. We lived in Rhode Island. And he said, God, I think you'd be so great at coaching. You love people. You love this idea of, development and whatever. And what if there were no bounds? Because he saw what I guess you could describe as limitations to the psychotherapy model, right? Which is essentially a medical model. So one thing I never agreed with was this idea of like determining a clinical diagnosis, and then how that negatively impacted most people's narrative of themselves. Like, oh, I am bipolar, I have depression, like let's stop leading with all these labels. If I hear another young person talk with me about their anxiety, like I am going to go crazy, because there's like, let's just stick with the label, and there's no deeper curiosity or understanding to how is that happening for me? How did I get here? What things are continuing to drive this behavior versus how could I develop my coping? It's just, oh, this is it. And
and you stop the label, right? The label,
you stop the learning. Really,
right.
You stop the growth and development. It like becomes the new story. And so it's like, God, I really don't want that for my clients. So I always stayed out of insurance because that required the diagnosis. So I was like, I'm not doing that. And then it was also from a business standpoint, more lucrative, which worked out. But I noticed I'm a social scientist, right? So I was measuring in detail who I was working with, how I was working with them, the tools, structures, frameworks, and what the results were. And it became really clear that there was this profile of person that I loved working with, that seemed to really enjoy working with me, and I did my absolute best work with, and they got the best results. And that was an entrepreneur. And what I found about working with them were that the tools, conversations we had, changes we implemented, not only benefited them, their business, but also their personal relationships too. So I said, I can help you develop this employee, get rid of those frustrations, and make your marriage better too.
It's so true, Brittany. I know it's funny. I have found that so often people will say to me, well, are you a life coach? Are you a career coach? I'm like, how is your life and your career and your health? How are those things separate, right? They all connect together. And it is, I tell clients all the time, if you make one positive change in one part of your life, the odds of it impacting all other parts of your life are probably 99%, right? Because we're not separate beings from one place to the other. We like to think we are, but we never are.
That's right.
Ever.
And I feel, and I, talk with people when they're like, I'm looking for a coach, whatever. I say, well, if this person isn't willing to discuss the whole you, if they don't, or if they can't manage that, you need to find somebody else, because these things aren't separate. What's happening for you at home informs how you show up at work and vice versa. So you need to be able to manage, that needs to be able to be managed and discussed, but also how you manage you. It also influences how you manage them. So when people come to me, they want me to sell them a solution for their team, their business, like culture development, like all these things. But so, I sell them what they want, but I give them what they need by saying, okay, first we're going to talk about how you manage you.
Right. Right. It makes the whole thing. It's the CEO of you. You are the CEO of you. Where do you want to develop? Right. Yeah. Just did a blog post on that last week, actually. It's so true. So you started out with entrepreneurs, and you've in the early parts of your coaching, right? Yeah. And then you've shifted and evolved into doing a lot of culture work, right?
Yeah. So what that evolution looked like. So it became clear to me, I wanted to work with business owners. They're so dynamic. There's so many things at play, and I could stand to make this like multi-pronged impact, right? Which felt really valuable. So I focused on that. I focused on shifting my messaging and who I was connecting with to bring in more clients like that. And then the people that I've worked with, the size of their business has grown over time.
Sure.
So, and that's been an evolution where, I have enjoyed working with teams so much as part of this process that naturally I was attracting businesses that I could bring that value to. So people who had more people in their organization, which became a larger and larger organization. But a larger organization means different things to different people. So I have people I work with that have a 40-person team, a 70-person team, a 300-person team, like around there. I am not in the big space of like thousands plus in an organization. I find that gets a little bureaucratic for me, that the ability to make change quickly gets stifled there. And so this is the sweet spot for me for now.
So I'm excited about one great story that you have about talking about shifting gears, about how you became interested in culture very early on in your career, right? That didn't turn out so well, but it seems like you've turned it around. It's turning out great now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so I guess, to fully answer your last question, culture to me is tied into people. Culture is how we do things around here. And that's greatly influenced by the people you have in the organization, the stories that they believe, the information they're taking in by noticing how others behave. And so that leads me to the story, right? Of maybe being, ahead of where I actually was skill-wise as a manager, but noticing that this organization I worked for, when I worked for the Department of Health, they're doing managing clinicians and a lot of clients in the community who needed a lot of care. It became clear that while I was in the manager's good favor at first, as I became a squeakier wheel and sharing the problems that I saw in the team, the lack of transparency and equality across people in the organization. And then once it came to the differences in treatments of clients, I said, enough. Like that is where I had a huge problem, because at the end of the day, like I'm a human. And if we are signing up, we have like an ethical responsibility to treat people and give them the best care that we can. And in fact, there are a tremendous amount of standards you have to follow, especially when you work for the state, to ensure that. And so I started talking to the quality assurance people, started, raising some red flags, and my boss did not like that one bit. But the internal conversation I was having with her is like, look at what you're asking people to do. You're asking people to do more and more work. You're taking away their resources. Some of that was outside of her control. That was budgetary restraints and all the things we hear about, in the public sector. But what was underneath it was this incredibly toxic, manipulative leadership strategy that while at first I was not victim to, I quickly fell out of her good favor. And I think she became incredibly threatened by me. I secretly wish that they hear these podcasts. I mean, being well over 10 years past this, I'm really grateful that they decided to fire me. They pushed me out of this organization. It went all the way to like HR, big interventions, the board, like crazy level of escalation, to the point where they found a place where I was responsible for a certain person's chart. I was responsible for 500 charts, and there was a missing signature on someone's chart somewhere. And they decided to take that and say it was a reason to, put me on notice or whatever.
But ultimately, it was because you were trying to make change.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to make change.
Yeah. So I was helping teams that weren't getting what they needed. I had to work holidays. I came in, I started petitions. I was collecting signatures. I mean, when you look at it, like, was I being insubordinate, which is what also made it onto my notice to be fired? I don't know, but I'm certainly more tactful today than I was 10 years ago. We'll say that. I learned a lot. But what I had going for me was this theoretical idea of being fresh out of grad school of how things should be, and knowing that this was wrong, and being naive enough to think that the systems that should support me, like quality assurance and HR, would support me. And so I went to those places, and boy, did I get screwed. But 10 years out, I am so grateful, because I have literally shaped my own company, built out structures and tools, and now serve organizations to ensure that nobody has to have the experience that I had.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So you were basically a whistleblower, is what I would call you early on in your career, right?
That's right. I was a whistleblower.
You were a whistleblower. But that event basically gave you what you needed in order to be where you are today, right?
That's right.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So talk to me a little bit about some of the culture work you're doing, because I think you just had a really, really awesome experience with a client in terms of a culture project that you've undertaken. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I am working with this fantastic organization, and they have us in person doing lots of offsites. So what does that look like? A day long, or it's actually like a day and a half long place where we meet, we pick the location, we have a wonderful dinner together, and we work through the really hard stuff. And so it's a series of, us creating a safe space. It's creating the prompts for people to speak their truth, to speak their challenges, to ask for support where they need it, where they don't feel like they can, and other show up in other ways. And then we provide support in between the offsites via coaching one-on-one for them to work through what does implementation of this look like, right? So we identify, how would we like this to be different? And then, how do we get there? Basically, and then I help them step by step to initiate those changes, figure out who do we need on board, who are the stakeholders, who can I lean on, and how does change actually look different in a way that feels successful for all of us? So these are really big conversations that I think people are interested in having, but it's really hard to make the space. I hear that, I'd love to do this work, but we don't have the time. If you don't have the time, then you need it more than anyone.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you, what do you think the biggest challenge is? Because there's all kinds of organizations, and I certainly talk to them, who recognize, we need to make this culture shift. But what is the biggest challenge between getting them to say, yes, we need to do this, to actually understanding what that means and taking that step to do it? What's the hardest part of that? Sometimes
it's really illustrating the pain point. Like, here's what will happen if you don't change a thing. Here's the path you're on. And helping them see that, because the truth is, I think a lot of leaders in a good way are optimistic, and they're smart, but sometimes that gets in their own way. Like, they have this belief that if I just do this one thing, or we're just in this super busy time, it's always this little excuse. And I don't think they're using it to release themselves from this responsibility in any way. But I think it's like this optimistic belief that things will be different in a few months. They never are. Like I saw this meme that said adulthood is just believing that next week will be easier when
with nothing changing. Yes.
It should be lighter, like the next week that never happens, right?
That's right. Exactly.
So, if you find yourself in this, like, gosh, I know things need to be different, but you only can find the time to put together like kind of a piecemeal approach, like, oh, we'll just like add a town hall meeting. We'll do an extra, like an internal newsletter or whatever. It's like, that's cute, but that's like not going to get you where you're really trying to get to. It will take a transformational engagement to get there. And so Absolutely. Half of that work happens in the commitment you and your team make to doing the work.
Mm-hmm. It's like anything, right? I mean, it's not any different in an organizational structure than it is in your own life, right? I always use for people the example of, hiring a trainer, right? How many people say, oh, I'm going to get in better shape. So there's these exercise programs. I'm going to start doing these classes, and you kind of do them, but it's the first thing that goes, right? It's the first thing when you just get versus hiring somebody for intervention, who you go to, who you work with, and then you have transformational change. Organizations are just a culmination of people, and absolutely they fall to the same, I don't know what you call it, derailers as we do as individuals. Yeah.
That's right.
That's fascinating. So what is the benefit? What have you seen? You launched this program, you have a client. What are you seeing as the benefit of that? What's the return?
Fantastic. I am texting with the CEO every day, and he is so excited to share. I just had literally the text I got this morning. I just had a breakthrough 90-minute call with my COO, would finally feel like I get him and I understand what he was trying to say before. I wasn't able to hear it, but you really helped us. So the point of leverage I have is having private conversations with each one of these people and being able to reframe and shift and make suggestions on how to approach these other people, because I understand what they're thinking and feeling. And so exactly. I'm the keeper of all of this, and I use it to help you guys help each other. And it's so fantastic to get those text messages. But I know it's also happening without the validation of it too. Like my partner and I really track what we're seeing and what we feel during the offsite, as just the energy in the room, the way people are working together, whatever. And the shift we've seen from, I guess, just over 2 months now has been remarkable. It's really, really wild. I wasn't expecting it to happen this fast. I was hoping by
in terms of the energy that people are bringing to the process.
That's right.
That is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually in a different way than most people would expect. The level of vulnerability and willingness to play full out in this less than comfortable, less than certain project or engagement. Like, this is not like, let's build a new arm of service. Like, let's build a new offering. Like, that's their comfort zone. They're great at that. This idea of coming together and sharing. One prompt we use is, what's something you respect about the other person, and also share what would make you trust them more. And this ended up being a 2.5 hour exercise because of what came up and came through for people. That was so helpful. But also then after that, we went into a working session where they worked on a real business problem, and the way that they came together, the way that they offered support, the questions that they asked were so much more reflective of partnership, giving people the benefit of the doubt, feeling really aligned. And what they were able to create in 90 minutes was wild. I mean, just like really, really fantastic.
Removing the roadblocks, right? Oh, that's awesome. That's excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I can see your energy and how, and I know you bring that to the engagement. So I'm certain that helps the process as well. So you are an adventurer. So I'm not surprised that you're willing to just get in there and drive this process for people, because you are an adventurer. Tell us a little bit about this. One blows me away. Okay, we're shifting gears here about who Brittany is, all right, and how courageous she is, because it takes courage to do what you've done with this organization. It took even more courage to drive across the country in a Winnebago with 2 children under 5, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
And I stayed married at the end.
And you stayed married, and you ended up with both kids. You started with 2 kids.
Yeah.
You didn't drop any of them off along the way. So that was big too.
Yeah. So we were part of this, like, I would say the trend of like COVID, van life, moving, changing it up. In fairness, my husband works in medicine, so he had it really hard for, that first year. We were ready for a change. For several reasons, moving out west made sense for our family. And that, I would say, was my big drive, was to move out here to Santa Barbara. And my husband said, okay, well, but let's do it in a Winnebago. Like, let's drive across, let's have a road trip.
The heck with the moving van, the heck with the plane. We're going to do it as hard. Yeah. We're going to make it as hard as we can. We're going to pack up a Winnebago.
Yeah. Never mind, like, sell your house, have the moving van, have it break down, go back to New Jersey, ship 2 cars. Like, it was a lot, you guys. So I guess I need to use that as part of like my, my resume. Like, hey, I did this and survived it, so I can survive.
There you go. Exactly. And you made it to Santa Barbara.
It is not without its challenges. Like, yes, my, 2-year-old at the time decided to stop napping the day we got in the RV. So that really pushed my patience. But I tell people all the time, like, I was in a really hard conversation with the CEO the other day. He was really pushing me, like borderline threatening. And I could just sit with that and hold that, because I've had a kid scream in my face. Like, I've had no sleep for weeks and still had to show up with loving kindness. Like, bring it on, buddy. You
said, bring it on. I drove cross country with a 2-year-old. I can do anything, right?
That's right. And my husband has a lot of ideas. So yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah. I feel like, especially in this privileged seat of being a coach, I have a huge responsibility to practice what I preach.
Absolutely.
If I'm not doing things that make me uncomfortable, if I'm not pushing the envelope in my own growth in a way that's like meaningful for me, I have no business asking anybody to do the same, because I have no idea what that would feel like. I am constantly trying to make myself uncomfortable. I just got off a call with a coach I'm considering hiring for a really uncomfortable amount of money. But how could I go out there and do that same thing if I'm not practicing it myself?
Absolutely. Got to have a coach. You got to be pushing yourself at all times. And by the way, that's such a great lesson for leadership in general. I asked a client once, how would it feel to be led by you? What would that feel like to be led by you? How would you like the way that you lead? How would you feel about being spoken to that way? How would you feel about being directed the way that you're directed? Would you sign up again? And It's a really interesting question, but it's to that point. Exactly. Well, key question. First of all, when you traveled East Coast to West Coast, or when you travel to someplace you haven't been in general, do you plug in this destination on GPS and then just let it go and you just follow it? Or do you look ahead and get an overview of the map?
Okay, so that's a great question. And on the road trip, we kind of had like a loose idea of states we wanted to visit, cities we wanted to see. But the truth is, we had so much stuff going on, we could not like plan beyond like the next 2 days. So that was a real adventure, because it was like, show up, think about where we would park the RV and what we wanted that stop to look like.
And we hope there's a space when you get there, basically, right?
Kind of. And it was a very busy time for RVs. So I definitely slept in a Walmart parking lot one night. I'm not proud of that.
That's okay. That's okay. You're here to talk about it. That's all that matters.
That's right. And I live to tell about it, and it's okay. Apparently that is actually a service that they provide, and you're allowed to do it at certain Walmarts. So if you pull up and that's what's happening, they're allowed to be there. But in other times, I would say we plan out like key things we want to experience. Or for me, the question I love to ask is, how do I want to feel on this trip? So beyond great. Like, what is the hotel? What is the itinerary? I think about, well, how do I want to feel? And some trips, I want to feel relaxed. I want to feel like I have nothing on my calendar. I want nobody to need a thing from me. So maybe that's a week at the beach. Like maybe that's an all-inclusive because I don't want to think about how the food is coming. Like I just want to sit. Where other trips are much more active and adventurous and like I'm seeking out something like that. But we need different things to fill our cups in different ways. And so the first thing I ask myself, like whether it's a business engagement, a trip, a friendship, a relationship, what do I want to feel when I'm engaging in this?
In this particular process to this particular end. Brittany, tell me, if you today could give advice to your younger self, what would it be and how old would you be when you got it?
Oh, what a great question. This really like makes me pause for reflection here. I would tell myself to trust the process the day that I got fired.
Oh, wow.
Maybe even a month before that. I would tell myself to trust the process a month before that.
Because you could see it coming.
Yes, because I was terrified. I was like terrified. I was having panic attacks at work. It's like 2 or 3 of them. That was two or three too many.
Yeah.
And I was a version of myself I didn't even recognize, but I still had enough courage to push forward. But it was scary as hell.
Sure.
So I would have loved to like give myself a hug, tell myself to relax, but to still push. Like push and know you're going to be okay.
Trust the process.
The anxiety, the panic was not sure if I was going to be okay.
Yeah. The fear of what this meant, the fear of what's next, as opposed to the excitement of what's next.
Right. I was having an identity crisis because I said, how do you go from a 4.0 student to being fired?
Right.
You know, it was a lot. But I'm so grateful for the journey because it's informed how I coach, how I lead, and who I'm encouraging my kids to become. And hopefully everybody that I have the privilege of interacting with, I hope that's the message they're seeing too, to be brave, to be courageous, to push the envelope, to do the thing that's uncomfortable because it's always worth it.
And to pay attention to what you're uncomfortable about. Because there is discomfort that is telling you to get out of a situation, and there is discomfort that's telling you to lean into a situation. And being able to have the insight to sit back and understand where the discomfort is coming from matters as much as being comfortable with the discomfort, right?
Great point. And such a good distinction that people don't often make.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, you're right, because it would have been the wrong move to stay. It doesn't be tougher or better or whatever to stay in a shitty situation or a toxic culture, like, or under bad leadership. But we don't always know how to make that distinction. And I've met so many people who are having that trouble making that discernment. Like, is this bad because I can't handle it? Like I need to be stronger, or is this bad and I need to go? Because
it's bad because this and me just don't go together. Right. It is a really significant, I actually have an episode on that as well. Yes, the challenge of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and what that really means. And we say that a lot. So it is something to kind of think about where the message is coming from and what it's trying to tell you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Eye Openers. Make sure to visit brittanydraws.com/podcast for this week's show notes. And if you found value in today's episode, I would so appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. This all helps to support the show.